Chapter 4. Our Failed Democracy, 1988-1993.
As the country continued its downward trajectory in the 1980s and 1990s, crippled by its own leadership regardless of dictatorship or democracy, about the only thing we still did well was play cricket, hockey and squash. My one contribution to restoring some of our battered national self-esteem was to lead our team in winning the World Cup in 1992. While I think the lowest point for the country's morale was when we lost East Pakistan, the highest was winning the World Cup. It was perhaps the last time Pakistan was united as everyone joined together to celebrate. When we arrived back in Lahore with the trophy, people lined the streets for miles. Watching the sheer joy on their faces gave me a tremendous feeling of satisfaction. I led the country to victory on the cricket field, but had yet to feel the need to mirror that leadership in politics. In July 1988, while I was playing for Sussex and living in London, I got an unusual call from Pakistan. It was my friend Ashraf Nawabi, who was close to Zia. He asked if I would become a minister in the General's cabinet. Zia had just dismissed the elected government of Imran Khan, who was probably the most decent prime minister Pakistan had ever had. Junho was from Sindh province, and Zia had assumed that he would be very pliable and docile. But Junho made the mistake of trying to assert himself, including on the issue of Zia's refusal to sign the Geneva Accords that would end the Soviet war in Afghanistan. He also tried to introduce an austerity campaign. Unlike many of Pakistan's rulers, who seemed to want to live in the grandeur of Mughal emperors, Junho led by example, driving a Pakistani-made Suzuki in an attempt to encourage cabinet members and the military to ditch their luxury imported cars. Nawabi's offer took me completely by surprise. I declined it politely, saying that I was not qualified for the job. A day later, Dr. Anwar ul Haq, Zia's younger son, called me up and urged me to join the government for the sake of the country. He said his father was sick of corrupt politicians who were only in politics to further their personal interests. People of integrity like me were needed in the cabinet, he said. This seemed rather ironic given that Zia had done so much damage to democracy and rule of law in Pakistan, particularly with his non-party-based elections. I was flattered but again declined. Shortly after that phone call, Zia died, killed, along with the top ranks of his army and the serving American ambassador to Pakistan, in a mysterious plane crash. I was in the south of France on holiday when I heard. It was quite a shock. Almost as much as with Bhutto. The cause of the accident remains a mystery, but there are plenty of conspiracy theories. In Pakistan there was a suspicion that the seer had a hand in it, that Zia was bumped off the moment he moved away from Washington's script and no longer served its purpose. After his death there was the same feeling as, years later, after Musharraf left, euphoria that we would be free again from dictatorship, corruption and media suppression to resume our journey towards true democracy. The election 3 months later of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's daughter Benazir as Prime Minister, the first open elections in a decade, ushered in a new period. Like all Pakistanis, I had great expectations of her. With her understanding of Western democratic societies and her education at Oxford and Harvard, she was ideally placed to bring in a new era for our country. She was well off and didn't need the money that came with power, or so we thought. She had everything going for her. She was popular in Pakistan and one of the best-known Muslim faces in the West. In fact, the Western media was totally enamored of her, the glamorous daughter of a charismatic democratic leader who had been hanged by a military dictator, and, to top it all, the first female prime minister of a Muslim state. In front of the Western media, Benazir played the role of being the exotic, daughter of the East, to perfection. Of course, there was an early warning sign even before she came to power. Her greatest betrayal was of the thousands of people who worked for the party founded by her father, the PPP, who had endured years in jail striving for democracy during Zia's martial law, in completely abandoning the mission statement of the People's Party, of having a, just an egalitarian society and having social justice, all that was cast off. She further made a mockery of democracy by competing with Nawaz Sharif, then Chief Minister of the Punjab and later to be her successor as Prime Minister, to buy off independent MPs. In the absence of ideology, politicians were auctioned and independents were bombarded with lucrative offers for them and their families. The term, Changa Manga, politics or culture in Pakistan stems from Sharif paying off and then literally locking up a group of provincial MPs in an isolated rest house in the forest of Changar Manga outside Lahore so that the PPP could not make them a counter-offer. It was not long before all of us were disappointed by Benazir. She began to behave more like an empress than a democratically elected prime minister. After her death, William Dalrymple described finding her majestic, even imperial, on interviewing her when she was prime minister. She walked and talked in a deliberately measured and regal manner and frequently used the royal we, he noted. I have to say that these imperial traits were already evident when she was young. The first time I met her, she was tearing a man to shreds for daring to question her socialist credentials. As a student at Oxford, I shared a house with Zia Malik, the brother of the actor Art Malik. One day I came home and could hear a woman's voice arguing as I locked up my bike outside the house. Zia had invited some of the other Pakistanis at Oxford round to meet Benazir. However, he had managed to enrage the guest of honor by complaining that effective land reforms had not been implemented in Sindh. It was obviously a sensitive topic for Benazir, as her father had made a token attempt to undermine the power of the feudal landlords with some limited land reform in 1972. I tried to calm Benazir down, and after that initial meeting we became good friends. She had a reputation for being polite to the English and imperious with fellow Pakistanis. I remember seeing her at a reception in 1974 held by the Pakistani embassy in the Netherlands in honor of the visiting Pakistan cricket team. Aged only about 20, she was ordering the ambassador around as if he was her personal servant. To the bemusement of me and the rest of the team, the poor man was scurrying round moving chairs and tables for her. It was also quite obvious that Benazir was ambitious from a young age. She stayed on at Oxford for an extra year after I left, and I always presumed it was because she was so determined to become president of the Oxford Union. Benazir's problem, though, was that her first ever job was being prime minister. And she only became prime minister because she was her father's daughter, just as her son Bilawal became chairman of the PPP at the age of 19 because he is his mother's son. Benazir had struggled, spending 6 months in jail and several years in and out of house arrest, but she had not had to fight her way to the top of her party, nor spend years in the political front line, fighting her party's cause. That is not to underestimate the suffering that years of confinement must have caused such a young woman, but it is not preparation for leading a country. How on earth can you run a country when your first job is to be prime minister? She had not been tested by the rigors of the journey towards leadership, nor developed a vision or ideology, nor learned about management or institution building. To become a general in the army, or a chief executive of a company, there is a long process of acquiring skills and accumulating responsibilities. Family dynasties in politics inevitably lead to incompetent leadership and decay. Their dominance of South Asian politics is precisely why true democracy has founded in the region. A meritocratic system is vital for democracy. In some ways, dynastic politics is even worse than a monarchical system. At least with a monarchy, a prince or princess is given a grounding in the art of leadership. Bilawal Bhutto, a young man who has spent half his life outside Pakistan, is far less equipped to lead than, for example, the UK's Prince Charles. If Benazir was woefully inexperienced for the job, she was also unfortunate in her choice of husband, Asif Ali Zardari. The son of a feudal family, he had achieved little in life off the polo field. In her defense, Benazir's position did not make it easy for her to find a decent husband. By the time she came to marry, at the age of 34, she was already considered old by Pakistani bride standards. Besides, her family was hounded by the Zia regime, so people were terrified of associating with them. It is very dangerous to be on the wrong side of politics in Pakistan. It was therefore difficult for her to meet normal people. I introduced her to a cousin, Imran Khan, at one point and they thought about marriage, but then Al-Zulfikar, the organization set up by her brothers to avenge their father's execution, hijacked a Pakistan International Airlines flight in 1981 and she was thrown back in jail. By the time she emerged, Imran Khan had married a wife chosen by his family. So she ended up with Zardari, whom she loved so much that she gave him free rein to use his position to amass as much power and money as possible. He treated Pakistan as his personal estate and considered it his feudal right to abuse power and take commissions on government contracts, with estates in France and, though now sold, in Surrey. It was clear where the money was going. Soon he was known as Mr. 10%, although from my one and only meeting with him I can say his price was double that. The construction of the hospital, about which more later, gave me an insight into the way he worked. In 1989, I went to Benazir's home, Bilawal House, in Karachi to ask for assistance in raising funds for the hospital. Since I was trying to help compensate for the lack of social services provided by the government, I thought I would get help in kickstarting the project. She was busy, so we were given an audience with Zardari. Since I had been friendly with Benazir at Oxford, I expected a sympathetic hearing. He was charming and extremely flattering towards me. However, he offered no help, and instead spent most of the time talking to my friend Tariq Shafi. Tariq comes from one of Pakistan's most powerful textile industrialist families, and Zardari asked him to set up a couple of factories in Sindh, PPP's stronghold, saying he needed to provide some employment in the province. He suggested that if 20% of the shares in the business were given to him, he would remove all bureaucratic hurdles and help obtain loans from the nationalized banks. Needless to say, no help on the hospital was ever forthcoming, either from Benazir or her husband. So imagine my surprise 5 years later when a week before the opening of the hospital I had an unexpected visit from an old friend called Nawed Malik, whom I had not seen for years. Bhutto was at that point in her second term of office, after being dismissed in 1990 on charges of corruption and incompetence and then voted in again in 1993. Nawed brought a message from her and Zardari saying they wanted to honor our hospital by cutting the ribbon. Although the hospital had already started operating on a small scale, we had set the official opening date for the 29th of December 1994 and had decided that the ribbon would be cut by our first cancer patient, a 10-year-old girl from a poor family called Sumaira Yusuf. Ordinarily it would be flattering for any institution to have the Prime Minister opening it, but of course I refused. I was later to learn the cost of snubbing the royal couple's request. Benazir had become quite unpopular because of corruption scandals surrounding her husband and had presumably wanted to cash in on the euphoria in the country surrounding the opening of the hospital. Besides, my recent 6-week campaign around Pakistan to raise money for the project had been seen by her and Zardari as politically threatening. The trip had in fact been a little like an election campaign, with thousands of ordinary Pakistanis turning out onto the streets to give me money. Some of them asked me to come into politics as they made their donations, and for the first time the media started talking about my entering the political fray. In between Benazir's 2 terms in office, Nawaz Sharif had come into power. After 2 years of her and Zardari, people thought he could only be an improvement. However, rather than building up the country, he expanded his own industrial empire. It grew at a phenomenal rate under government patronage, a staggering 4,000% from 1985 to 1992. He was just as corrupt as Benazir and Zardari, he simply went about it in a different way. He perfected the art of buying politicians. When I first met Sharif in the late 1970s at a cricket club, he seemed like a regular guy with little drive or ambition, more interested in cricket than politics. I think his real dream would have been to be captain of the Pakistani cricket team. He just loved the glamour of the sport. An incident happened in autumn 1987 which illustrates Sharif's mindset. Just before the World Cup in October 1987, when I was captaining Pakistan, we played a warm-up match against the West Indies at the Gaddafi Stadium in Lahore. Moments before the match, the Secretary of the Cricket Board, Shahid Rafi, informed me that the Chief Minister of Punjab, Nawaz Sharif, was going to captain the team that day. I was taken aback but then assumed that he would have a non-playing role and wanted to watch the match from the dressing room. Therefore I was shocked to see him walk out to toss the coin with Viv Richards, the West Indian captain, dressed in his cricket whites, but there was a bigger shock to come. He won the toss, and returned to the dressing room and started putting on his pads. None of the team could believe what we were seeing. He was going to open the innings with Mudassar Nazar against the West Indies, one of the greatest fast bowling attacks in cricket history. Nazar wore batting pads, a thigh pad, chest pad, an arm guard, a helmet and reinforced batting gloves, while Sharif simply had his batting pads, a floppy hat, and a smile. For those who are not conversant with cricket history, it is important to know that this was a fast bowling attack not seen before or since in the cricketing world. Such was the West Indies' blistering pace, with 4 bowlers bowling above 90 miles per hour. It was the sort of attack that had destroyed the careers of many a talented batsman, international batsmen, professional cricketers, who would have sleepless nights when they were due to face the West Indies. And here was Nawaz Sharif, who had no experience of playing at this level of cricket, walking out, unprotected, to face this deadly attack. Clearly he would not have the reflexes to defend himself if a short ball was aimed at his body, so there was a risk of a serious injury. I quickly inquired if there was an ambulance ready. As we watched the first ball, by a 6 feet 6 inch West Indian fast bowler, hit the wicketkeeper's gloves even before Sharif could lift his bat, the team sighed with relief that it wasn't straight. Mercifully for Sharif, the second ball was straight at the stumps, and before he could move his stumps lay shattered. For those who don't understand cricket, Sharif was trying the equivalent in academic terms of a child, having just finished primary school, attempting to write a PhD thesis. When I was a schoolboy, I indulged in a daydream that I would be at a test match, the team would discover they were a player short, I would put up my hand and be brought on to suddenly become a hero. This seemed to be Sharif's dream too, as if he could bypass the whole process of working your way up the ladder and become a hero. It was only when I started growing up, as a teenager, that I learned there are no shortcuts to achieving big dreams, there is a whole struggle a person has to go through to reach the top in any profession. Here we are talking about the chief minister of the biggest province of Pakistan having such fantasies. Sharif had been forced into politics by his father, who wanted to protect his business interests. Sharif had a similar handicap to Benazir, in that he was given power without ever having earned it the hard way. Through his complete loyalty and subservience to Zia, rather than experience, he proceeded quickly through the ranks of the Punjab government, progressing from finance minister to chief minister in 1985. Military dictators always look for pliable politicians, and he fitted the bill perfectly. Sharif appeared to view public office not as a responsibility but as a means to get rich, and once he became prime minister in 1990, many of the family assets were acquired through loans from nationalized banks that have never been paid off. The Pakistani press soon started to print allegations that senior politicians were trying to bully banks into giving them multimillion-dollar loans. Under Sharif's government, the culture of lifafa journalism also sprang up. A lifafa is a packet or bribe. Journalists were bought off with cash while politicians were bribed with plots of government-owned land. Sharif, like Zardari, is rumored to be one of the richest men in Pakistan. He was dismissed amid charges of corruption after 3 years, only to be replaced by Bhutto in her second term. He returned to power for his second term in 1997 after Bhutto was again forced to step down. The merry-go-round of corrupt government was as dizzying to the public as to the politicians themselves. Zardari's political life is an indication of how Pakistan's political system worked. When Benazir's government was dismissed in 1990, he went straight from the PM's house to jail. When she came back into power in 1993, he went straight from jail to the Prime Minister's house, and in 1996 he went from there back to jail. The moment he came back into power, all charges were dropped. Our justice system could only act against those out of power. In power, the justice system became part of the executive. Every time Benazir or Sharif came back, one hoped that maybe they might have learned something in opposition or in exile, but to no avail. Like most people, I watched the descent of our country into corruption and lawlessness with dismay. It was in the 1990s that Pakistanis really started to lose hope in the country, and there was a great brain drain as the country plunged into semi-anarchy. More or less every institution was destroyed. Corruption permeated down from the Prime Minister to government ministers to members of parliament, the bureaucracy, the judiciary and the police, into every stratum of society. When the Punjab Inspector General of Police Abbas Khan was asked by the Lahore High Court in the 1990s why the city's police was so corrupt, he reported that 25,000 policemen had not been recruited on merit, and amongst them were known criminals. He blamed the situation on Nawaz Sharif's Punjab government. In Sindh, the PPP and MQM, Mutahida Qawmi Movement, the United National Movement, governments had done exactly the same, filling the police up with their party cadres, even though some of them had a criminal past. Thus destruction of our police system was done at the cost of law and order in Pakistan, and it was deliberate because the police typically play a major role in manipulating the elections and intimidating the opposition. The whole moral fabric of the country began to fall apart. In 1996, Transparency International, an NGO that rates political corruption in an annual index, rated Pakistan to be the second most corrupt country out of 58. The economy fared no better. Unemployment coupled with inflation, due mainly to indirect taxes, forced people to turn to crime. The drug mafia boomed. During the 1990s, economic growth, exports, revenues and development spending slipped while poverty levels rose. Economic sanctions slapped on the country following Pakistan's first nuclear test in 1998 only added to our woes. What pained me in particular was the environmental and cultural destruction. For me, the beauty of Pakistan was never in our cities, it was in the mountains and the wilderness. In the UK, the environmental movement had got into full swing by the 1980s, while in Pakistan we were destroying everything worth preserving without any concern for future generations. I could not bear watching our forests decimated, our rivers polluted, historical monuments destroyed and above all our wildlife disappearing. Our tree cover suffered more under democratic governments, because members of the timber mafia would fight elections with money made from cutting forests. One of the most powerful and ruthless organizations within Pakistan, the timber mafia engages in illegal logging, estimated to be worth billions of rupees each year, wrote the British newspaper The Guardian. In the summer of 1993, I was driving along the Karakoram highway and saw timber, the remains of conifers hundreds of years old, lying on either side of the road for around 50 miles. I was so upset about it I wrote an open letter to the caretaker Prime Minister at the time, Moin Qureshi, who had taken over after Nawaz Sharif resigned from his first term in office as Prime Minister. He did take measures to crack down on illegal logging, but they didn't last long. The problem is that Pakistan hasn't changed the law since the days of the British. The fine is a few hundred rupees. Pakistan has one of the lowest percentages of forest cover in the world, 2.5% according to a 2009 study by the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. The deforestation rate stands at 2.1% a year, the highest in Asia. Already limited by an arid or semi-arid climate in parts of the country, our forestry has been further decimated by large-scale deforestation and degradation. Not surprisingly, floods are now a problem in many areas as a result. Successive governments have allowed Pakistan to squander both its forests and its water supplies as a growing population competes for dwindling resources. But politicians in Pakistan have no sense of the environment or of aesthetics. Most of them are only interested in making a quick buck. They have houses in fancy foreign locations, their wealth is stashed abroad, they educate their children in the UK, Canada or the United States, they have no stake in the nation's future. Every time the government changes in Pakistan, there is an exodus of crooked politicians who scuttle away to their safe havens abroad. There they bide their time till the new government has been discredited and then come back to start their looting and plunder again. Nor do they have any knowledge of the Pakistani countryside, rarely venturing beyond the cities. They are ignorant of Pakistan's natural treasures, and yet Islam instructs Muslims to care for the environment. Amidst the destruction being wrought by our politicians, Pakistan's World Cup win was a much-needed boost for national morale. The irony was that I had never planned to stay in cricket into the 1990s. I had already retired following the 1987 World Cup, but a year later General Zia requested my return to the sport on national television. At a dinner organized for the team, he took me into another room and warned me about what he was going to do. "Don't humiliate me by saying no," he said. "I am going to ask you to come back for the sake of your country." Touched by the appeal to my sense of patriotism, I of course had to say yes. The other reason for my return, though, was that I still had an unfulfilled longing to have a last bash at the West Indies. This was one of my great cricketing ambitions, along with winning the World Cup, and beating England and India on their home turf. I wanted to leave on a high, and the chance to have another crack at the West Indians came up because Australia cancelled their tour of the West Indies in 1988 and Pakistan was invited instead. The main aim when playing them was to lose with dignity. Winning was not even considered an option, such was the destructive power of the West Indies juggernaut. But we were the first team in 15 years to play them on their home turf, with home umpires, and come back with the honours, getting the better of a 1-all draw. By the following year, however, I began to cut down on my cricket commitments and seriously concentrate on the hospital project. Then in 1990 Pakistan toured Australia, and it was now that I noticed that running around for the hospital and not playing any first-class cricket had taken its toll on my game. I could not perform at the level that was expected of me, especially as a bowler. Yet if I flopped, it would have disastrous consequences for my recently begun fundraising campaign. The problem was compounded by the weak team I was leading. A couple of top players had retired and the new ones were not up to the mark. Although we lost the series, I personally had a successful tour and went on to win Cricketer of the Year in Australia as a batsman. I learned a lot as the leader of the team. Cricket is the only sport where you need leadership on the pitch. No other sport gives so much of a role to the captain as in cricket. In all other sports it is the coach who is crucial. A leader on the cricket field can raise the performance of an ordinary team, whereas a poor captain can prevent a talented team from fulfilling its potential. A cricket captain, to be leader, has to lead by example. He has to show courage if he wants his team to fight. He has to be selfless if he wants his players to play for the team. He has to have integrity if he wants to command the respect of the team. Above all, in times of crisis, he must have the ability to take the pressure. That's when a team needs the leader most. People come under pressure when they fear failure, but it is all in the mind. Striding out to the crease, when you can be out first ball, especially when your team is in deep trouble, if you allow yourself to feel fear, you will freeze. The fear of failure clogs the mind with negative thoughts. Even before I walked out, I would be prepared for a crisis so I would not be taken by surprise. I concentrated only on how I was going to build my innings. I would block out any thought of failure. I knew that someone who was afraid would find their hands tensing up, so I would relax my hands, keep my focus on how to organize my innings, and consciously ignore any hint of fear. When as a bowler I was at my fastest, I would watch the body language of an incoming batsman, especially the eyes, as they would reveal any traces of fear. Very rarely did they not succumb. From the middle of my career I became an expert at dealing with pressure. When I became captain, the great players had left and I had to lead a very inexperienced team. Before entering a match, I knew that if I did not perform, the team would not win. It didn't mean I always ensured the team won, but it meant I automatically put myself under pressure. If a captain shows any weakness or buckles under pressure, the team collapses, and I knew that without my performance the team wouldn't succeed. I discovered that the most crucial time for a leader is when there's a crisis, and by constantly playing under pressure, I learned to cope with crises. The West Indies of the 1980s would always target the opposing captain, knowing that the moment the captain collapsed, so would the team. I feel my greatest achievement in my cricket career was that I was the only captain in the 1980s who played 3 series against the far superior West Indians and who did not lose. Every other team was crushed by them. When I got back from Australia in 1990, I decided I would give up the sport. I thought it best to leave on a high and I wanted to concentrate on the hospital. I simply could not risk another series and wanted to leave on my own terms rather than putting myself at the mercy of the selectors. Hardly anyone in international cricket, and particularly Pakistani cricket, leaves with dignity. Without officially announcing my retirement, I stopped playing, and spent the next 6 months working on the hospital and doing the things I had missed most while being on the cricket circuit, trekking in the mountains and shooting partridge. However, when I returned and told the hospital board members about my retirement plan, they were horrified. They all felt there was no way we would be able to collect significant funds for long once I was out of cricket. None of them had any idea about the game, all they noticed was the publicity in the press. I knew nothing would give more pleasure to the cricket-mad Pakistani nation than winning the 1992 World Cup held in Australia, which was at that point more than 2 years away. I also realized that in order to collect the vast sums of money required by the hospital, my only chance lay in doing something dramatic like winning cricket's most high-profile tournament. So I started preparing a year in advance, meticulously planning the team I would need to execute my strategy. Knowing that it would be the last time I would play international cricket, I put everything into getting as fit as I could despite being 39 and way past my physical prime. Since I knew that the hospital's future depended upon our World Cup win, before leaving for Australia I told the hospital marketing team to prepare a strategy for fund collection in case we came home with the trophy. This was my 5th World Cup, and my 3rd as captain. It was the only time I told the press that we would return victorious. Unfortunately, my plan started going wrong the moment we landed in Australia. Our star one-day batsman Saeed Anwar and our fast bowler Waqar Yunus, both key players in my strategy, both match winners, got injured and were ruled out. A good team is lucky to have 4 match winners. Then 2 days before the World Cup was to begin, I ruptured a cartilage in my shoulder. It was only when a Melbourne specialist examined me that I realized the true extent of the injury. He said I had to rest it for at least 6 weeks. I was shattered. It was a disaster on so many levels. Only a sportsman can understand the utter disappointment and demoralization of getting an injury after all the hard work and training that goes into preparing for a major tournament. I also realized that my not being able to play would have a devastating impact on the morale of my young team. What's more, I had staked the hospital on winning the manager Intikhab Alam, and I decided to keep my injury a secret from the team. My worst fears were realized when the team did disastrously without me in the 2 opening matches against the West Indies and England. Although over the years I had become mentally strong by taking on challenges, especially my comeback from the stress fracture in my shin bone, I would never normally have played with such an injury, mainly because I would have been too scared to fail. I would certainly not have played if the team was good enough to win without me. So I began to play by taking cortisone injections to the shoulder as well as oral painkillers. Never had I played in my 21-year career in such a bad way. So serious was my injury that after the tournament it was fully 6 months before I could lift a glass with my right hand without feeling a shooting pain from my right shoulder to my neck. Those who remember that World Cup will recollect that midway through the competition we were third from the bottom. The bookies rated our chances 50-1. My cousin Javed Burki, who was the chairman of the selection committee as well as my childhood hero, called me up regarding the issue of sending a replacement for another injured player. He seemed to have given up on us from the tone of his voice. I told him we would win. There was silence at the other end. Later he told my sisters that he was convinced I had finally flipped. My closest English friend, Jonathan Murmajan, called me to cheer me up, as a true friend would do in bad times. It was he who broke it to me about the 50-1 odds. I begged him to put money on us. He did not share my faith and regrets it to this day. One of my oldest friends, Moby, advised me not to come back to Pakistan afterwards, telling me to take a holiday in Europe for a while to let the country cool down. Such was the growing hostility against me. I'm afraid every top sportsman has to accept this. The greater the public expectations, the greater the public disappointment. In the beginning, when I failed to perform to the crowd's expectations, I would feel self-pity and hurt when I was criticized, but with time I became resigned to the rollercoaster that is sporting fame. In Perth, the Pakistani ambassador had a dinner for the team. It was more like a funeral wake. I gave a speech and told them that I had no doubt we would win. I can still picture the look of complete bewilderment and bemusement on people's faces as I said it. I concluded by saying that hopelessness was a sin in Islam, because it meant one had no faith in Allah. This was widely reported in the Pakistani press and ridiculed. Meanwhile, I received bad news from my sister Alima, who was managing the hospital's marketing campaign. Fundraising had virtually collapsed because of the team's poor performance, and the press had made me the scapegoat. Nevertheless, I told her to prepare for a renewed campaign once we came home with the cup. Unfortunately, she did not take this suggestion seriously either, and nothing had been prepared when we returned to Pakistan victorious. My complete belief that we would win boosted the team's confidence and helped prevent it from falling apart. At times of crisis, the entire team will look to the captain, but they do not so much pay attention to what he says as to whether he believes in what he is saying. They watch his body language rather than listen to his speeches. My conviction gave me the right body language. It helped too that in the previous 3 years we had won many times from impossible situations. In 1989, we had won the Nehru Cup in India, after being on the brink of elimination midway through the competition. We won the final in Calcutta in front of 100,000 Indians who were egging on the West Indians to win. We were also lucky in the World Cup when on 2 occasions rain was forecast while we were batting second. It only had to rain on one of those occasions for 10 minutes and it would have been all over for us. In that tournament, the laws were such that a team batting second had no chance of winning if the match was interrupted by rain. In the semi-final in Auckland, the clouds came but it did not rain. From the midway point we came from behind and went on to win. 20 minutes after the match finished, it started to rain, and it rained for the next 24 hours. My love affair with cricket had been over since 1987, after that I had played only for the hospital. So happy was I for this dream of mine that at the presentation ceremony after the game, I forgot to thank the team for their brilliant performance. I was criticized for it and I must confess the speech was terrible. Thinking about it still makes me cringe. But quite frankly, I had other things on my mind than making a speech. It also has to be said that I was the kind of person who had trouble speaking to a small room of people, and suddenly a microphone was thrust in my face without warning and I was expected to address a crowd of 90,000 people and hundreds of millions of television viewers around the world. However, something bizarre happened after the World Cup. For some reason, several players in my team began to think that the money the ecstatic Pakistani public would shower on them for winning the tournament would somehow be diverted by me to the cancer hospital. I am still puzzled about how they came to this conclusion. When we stopped in Singapore on the way home from Australia, the Pakistani ambassador presented me with some money for the hospital. I guess that might have sparked off this idea, and that the team might have thought this money should go to them. Then when we returned to Pakistan, the traders of Lahore threw a function in the city's Shalimar Gardens in our honor. In the beautiful setting of the formal gardens, built by the Mughal emperor in the mid-17th century, they announced they too had raised some contributions for the hospital. To my amazement, the rest of the team walked out of the party in protest. I had had several great shocks in my life by that point: my mother's death, hearing about the massacres in East Pakistan from Ashraful Haq, breaking my leg at the peak of my career. But learning that players I had handpicked and nurtured could think I would divert their winnings took me by complete surprise. It disappointed me intensely. Awards were always divided up evenly. If you were man of the match, the winnings were shared amongst the team. For 10 or 11 years I had been man of the series almost every series, and I had always shared everything. Most of the team were later to apologize for their behavior. A few of them said they had been misled and they all blamed each other. I can't help feeling that the seeds of greed were sown after the 1992 World Cup. Altogether the winnings were £90,000 each. No Pakistani cricketers had ever made so much money. The team that I left in 1992 was the best team in world cricket and should have dominated the sport for the next decade, and they were the favourites to win the next two World Cups of 1996 and 1999, but that team never lived up to its potential. From 1993 this great team was dogged by match-fixing allegations, culminating in the ultimate disgrace of sport fixing in 2010. The three tours where I was tested the most as a captain were India in 1987, the West Indies in 1988 and the 1992 World Cup. India was hard because the tour was played there, with Indian umpires, with a Pakistan team on paper inferior to the Indians especially under home conditions. Losing to India, as far as the people of Pakistan were concerned, was not an option. When the two play, it ceases to be a game and turns into a highly pressurized contest, putting the sort of pressure on players that they don't feel in any other series. When we had lost in India in 1979, our captain was a broken man and retired from cricket. In the West Indies in 1988, we were facing one of the greatest teams in history. One sign of weakness and we would have collapsed. To go to their home ground, to play against them with home umpires, and to come away with a draw was my greatest triumph. No team had achieved that in the past decade. And the 1992 World Cup matches were completely about holding your nerve. Captaining the team developed in me the ability to take pressure, to hold my nerve in a crisis, and nowhere could I have had such training as on the cricket field. It was to prove immensely valuable to me later in my life. It was the same when I set up the political party, or took on building the cancer hospital. They needed leadership, the hospital project lurched from crisis to crisis, and the party has been in opposition for 15 years, no other Pakistani party has done so and survived. I was under pressure from the British Pakistani community to tour England a month after the World Cup and they were promising to raise huge funds for the hospital. I was considering it, even though by this stage one had played 21 years of international cricket and was desperate to move on. Mercifully, the players' walkout in Shalimar Gardens made it easier for me to make the decision and I finally cut my links with the sport, closing that chapter of my life. I moved on quickly, plunging myself into my next great challenge. The hospital now needed all my time. I donated my entire prize money to the project and the win gave the fundraising efforts a huge boost. I was able to collect 140 million rupees during the 6 weeks after the World Cup, whereas in the first 1.5 years of campaigning we had collected only 10 million rupees. It was not till 1994 that I had to worry about cash flow for the project again. My cricket career might have been over, but politics was still beckoning. In the summer of 1993, I was asked to be a cabinet minister in the caretaker government of Moin Qureshi that had been formed following the dismissal of Nawaz Sharif's government by President Ghulam Ishaq Khan. Qureshi himself called me. Again I declined. However, by now I was thinking about how I could make some kind of political contribution. At this point most Pakistanis were pretty concerned at the rapid downward slide of the country caused by the avarice and sheer incompetence of our politicians. Both Bhutto and Sharif had been in power once each, and it had become blatantly obvious that their predominant interest was in amassing personal wealth and holding on to office by stifling opposition through any means. Neither had any vision for the country, as clearly manifested by their total lack of interest in investing in human capital. In real terms, spending on education and health nosedived during their 11 years of government, despite the fact that, as the Asian tiger economies have proved, both sectors always go hand in hand with development. At this stage, however, I felt that politics was not suited to either my introverted temperament or my very private way of life. Therefore, rather than think of coming into politics myself, I began to look for people I could support who would be an alternative to Sharif and Benazir. During this period I also started meeting a lot of politically minded people, and held endless discussions on the state of the nation. This was the first time in my life that I had met people outside my small circle of friends and cricketing circles.